Our guest today is Gina Grad. Miss Grad is the co-host of 100.3 The Sound and also the co-host of the Adam Carolla podcast. This is the Danesh Show. I'm Noah Danesh. So Gina, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me. It's fun.
Thank you. So what really got you involved in radio?
Well, my dad is an old-time radio vet. He's been in the business for over 40 years. And so when I was growing up, I wanted to do musical theater my entire life because radio was for old, boring dads, and I had no interest in it. But growing up around radio, growing up around that environment, and going to school for theater and not really connecting with it like I thought I would after so many years and moving to New York and trying to be an actress, and something just didn't feel right. And I realized for me, I was kind of at a point where I was sort of sick of interpreting somebody else's words, and I was ready to sort of use my own voice and speak for myself. So radio and stand-up comedy and those kind of things really started to appeal to me. And so I took the worst jobs in radio and just kept doing it and fell in love. Every day I was doing those menial, hard to do, hard to get up for jobs, and realizing that this is really where I felt like I belonged.
So you worked your way up in the radio station from the bottom, going all the way up now to the co-host,
Oh,
correct?
yeah. I've experienced pretty much every job you could have at a radio station.
And what was that process like?
Well, I'll never forget, I was working in Beverly Hills right when I moved here, and great people, great job, but it wasn't for me. It was selling suits, and I was meeting cool people, and I was having fun, but it wasn't my destiny. So one day I had enough. I had a very minor emotional breakdown in the parking lot at lunch and called my dad, and I said, is there anyone you can reach out to just get me an interview, and I'll take it from there, and if they don't want me, that's fine, but is there anyone I can talk to? And so he arranged for me to have an interview at KLSX, which you're too young to remember. It was the talk station with Adam Carolla at the time, Howard Stern, Tim Conway Jr., and they were so impressed with me. I wore my suit, I had an accordion folder, I wanted to wow them, that they gave me a job screening phone calls Saturday mornings from 4 a.m. to like 8 a.m. And that was my big glamorous break into radio. And so I got my foot in the door. I kept working. I would come in at night and use studios that weren't being used and just practice and talk to myself and pull other people in and talk to them and do these mock shows and have people listen to the tapes. And it was really exciting and it was a lot of fun. So when a really cool job opened up on the Tim Conway Jr. show at night, he said, who's that girl across the hall that's always talking to herself? See if she wants to do it. She seems like a hard worker. So you just keep kind of getting your foot in the door different ways.
Mm-hmm. Other than your father, who do you think have been your biggest inspirations in radio?
Well, there's a few. I have been very lucky to work with some of the best in the business, and not just from my perspective, but like really, like I know how lucky I am. I do think of Tim Conway Jr. as my first mentor in radio besides my dad. Arsenio Hall would come in and work with us once a week, and we're still friends, and it was still great to learn from him. Adam Carolla, of course, who I work with now. Mark Thompson. Now, you might remember, you're so young, I don't know. Mark and Brian, the old Mark and Brian shows, a little before your time, yeah. On KLOS, I ended up working with Mark on his show, Mark in the Morning, and he taught me more in 2 years than I even thought I could take in. So I've just had these mentors, these titans of LA radio that I've been able to sit so close to, and it's made me up my game. There's no patting you on the head and good job. It's this train's rolling and you got to do what you have to do to stay on it.
Yeah. So what is it like being a co-host on a radio show?
It's interesting. It's a different skill set than being a host. This is, when it's your show and you have a different set of responsibilities. You're the traffic cop. You can't run out of things to say. It's a different world. But when you're the co-host, you get real good, real fast at listening at what we call it. Do you ever take improv classes or anything like that?
I haven't taken improv classes.
Okay,
no.
well, when you do, because everyone in LA eventually will, The phrase you're going to hear more than anything is yes and. So if we say, I went to a basketball game last night, and then the other person says, yes, and there was a fire. Yes, and instead of, no, that didn't happen. You just keep building, yes, and, yes, and. And that is a crucial skill to develop in radio, so much so that I actually went back, and I'm now back in improv to brush up, because that is such an important part of co-hosting. Listening, building on what the host is saying, having something to offer, but not taking the reins and steering the conversation, just adding all the time.
Another crucial skill I think you should probably have is confidence, correct, for being a co-host? I mean, not being afraid of talking in front of all these people?
It for sure helps. And it is something you have to fake if you're not feeling it. And I have done that 1,000 times. At every new job I've gotten, every time I filled in, every time I auditioned, it's just, the fake it till you make it. You make it look like this is your 57th time doing it, not your first time, and just jump in.
Mm-hmm. And then what are your hours like now? You're working at the morning show. How does that work?
The hours are special. I used to work at night on radio, but now doing mornings is a game changer. The show currently it's slid around a little bit, but right now it's 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. And so I'm up about 3:45 a.m. And then, I do a little work. I try and go to the gym, and then I go to the Adam Carolla show in Glendale. I live in the South Bay, so it's a real long 13-hour circle every day, but it's worth it. It's a great job. I used to live in Hollywood. It was way more convenient, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then so another thing for radio is there's a lot of new mediums coming out, like podcasting. You do work on podcasting. I'll get to that a little bit more.
I have my foot in both, yeah.
Yeah. What is it like on radio now? Where do you see that going?
That's a tough question, because that's something that people in radio have been trying to figure out for the last 15 years. There's always these little devils on your shoulder, screaming, radio's dead, it's a dying industry, it's a dinosaur. And here I'm looking around in a great job, getting a paycheck every 2 weeks, seeing a running machine, and I see no sense of that. So it's, you always have to prepare to be able to evolve. But as far as turning on your radio and all of a sudden having dead air, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
And so podcast is another thing you're involved in. So what is it like being on a podcast with Adam Carolla?
Well, it's amazing, but those are almost two separate questions, because I've been podcasting too for a long time. I had a podcast for about 7 years, and there's no, in terrestrial radio and terrestrial TV, you get really used to, got to go to break, make sure you're break on time. If you don't break on time, all hell breaks loose. So that's a really big part of, doing things that involve sponsors and terrestrial. Podcasts, there's a little more breathing room. You can just, if Adam wants to rant about something, and he often does because he's really good at it, we could do that for almost an entire show, and it's gold, because he's kind of a genius, and we just hold on tight and hope we can keep up. But how do I put this? The FCC isn't as involved in podcasting, so if you really want to show your passion with a string of 4-letter words, nobody's going to stop you. Mm-hmm. And there's no schedule to most podcasts. You just let it breathe, and when you feel like it's time to change, you move on to something else. Mm-hmm.
So that schedule, coming back to the radio, how do you deal with like a stringent schedule for radio, having to deal with breaks and songs coming on? How do you work with that?
It's a learned skill. I don't know anyone who has that internal timing, because if they did, they'd be doing something else. We're all quote unquote artists. Sounds so embarrassing. But people who love to talk and who are making a living at it. So we're not the schedule keepers, we're not the traffic cops, but you have to learn that skill, or we say things like, don't blow the quarter hour, because every quarter hour we need to have a certain, time spent listening and that sort of thing. And you can't just, go, I think we'll skip it, I'm still talking. Like, no, you want to keep things on time, and you have a responsibility to the station and to the commercial breaks and everything. So it's a learned skill, and sometimes you make mistakes, but you try not to.
Mm-hmm. But with the podcast, you do get some more freedom too, so that's pretty.
Yeah, and that's, in that case, it's like, and even when I was doing my own show, it's, as long as all the sponsors get mentioned, or you do what you say you're going to do, it's not as rigid. But now, I mean, with podcasts, people are starting to make money. They're starting to have advertisers. They're starting to see the benefit of coming on that kind of medium. So I think that we're still kind of in the wild, wild west of podcasting, even now, even as sophisticated as it's gotten. And it's going to tighten up. Once the money comes into it, people want to make sure that their needs are being served.
How do you think of what you're going to talk about this week, next week? What do you guys decide to talk about?
Well, luckily, I don't have to do that anymore. That's Adam's job. If I have something that is on my mind or I think would be interesting, I let him know and we work it in. But when I was hosting mine, you really start to look at your day. You look at everything in a new way. I mean, sometimes I'm just walking through the day. What happened? Nothing. And you go home and you watch TV and you go to sleep. But when you know that it's your responsibility to come and tell a story and to keep your audience involved, you start seeing little patterns in people's speech that might be funny. You start seeing someone on the street that did something that you never really stopped and noticed before, and that can be a 15-minute story, and it can be really riveting. You just open your eyes in a way that, I didn't realize how much sleepwalking through life I was doing until I was told to start noticing my surroundings.
And so for the people who don't know, what is the Adam Carolla Show about?
It's about whatever Adam wants it to be about. It's a comedy podcast. He has a lot of really interesting views on lots of policies and politics, but he's sort of an intense observer of human nature. Things that, like I just said, that the rest of us would never notice in a million years. Adam finds it, picks a needle out of a haystack, and just kind of blows your mind with some observation about the way humans interact with each other. So we play games, and we have features, and we have a lot of fun, and we take calls, and we have guests. But the cornerstone is and always will be Adam's genius brain.
And what do you see as the future of podcasts in general?
I think it's going to get more sophisticated. I mean, we're flooded with them now. When I started doing it, I think it was kind of new, like maybe 8-9 years ago. There weren't that many to choose from, which might have been why we did so well. And now there's just so many that, again, I think a lot of it has to do with money and interest. And say you have, I don't know, 100,000 downloads per show. You go to an advertiser and say, hi, I have this bucket of ears, and they listen to my show every week or every day. Let's make a deal. So it's going to start streamlining, I think, once more money comes into it, once it's more legitimized, and it could compete with radio, but I don't see radio going anywhere.
And for both radio and podcast, I'm sure you guys receive a lot of feedback, positive and negative.
Sure.
How do you deal with that kind of feedback?
It's hard. Not so much anymore because I feel more established in what I'm doing, and you get validated and people start to accept you. But and I'm the same way. I didn't realize it until I was in the hot seat, but people gravitate towards what's familiar. So if a new show comes on or a new person fills in, they are immediately sort of the enemy until you prove that you're worthy of sitting in that seat. And that can be really tough. I don't know anyone who, I almost don't know anyone who can sort of look at a criticism and go, ugh. So when I first started, it was painful. Like you'd get 10 great compliments, and then you start to feel like you're really getting somewhere, and then one person would just pull the rug out of all of your self-confidence. So I'm not as susceptible to that now, but it's only because I've been through it, and nothing can compare to basically starting 2 huge shows at the same time and just kind of being knocked around in the waves by every single person online until I gained their respect.
And you also have a partnership with Subaru, which lets you do a lot of interesting, cool things. So what is that?
Well, I'm really lucky. I do endorsements for them through the radio station and have a partnership with them, and driving the 2017 Impreza right now. It's pretty sweet. Oh, nothing. And one thing that I really do get so much out of, and I'm so grateful for them, is they have a huge stake in the charity community. So every month it's a different theme, and I get to go, spotlight different charities and spend the day with them. And they're great people. They don't do it. I will just shamelessly beg people for money on their behalf because they deserve it. One of the most recent ones I did is one of the most incredible charities I've ever heard of, and I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called A Walk on Water. Does that sound familiar?
No.
It didn't to me until they came in to the station one time. They're these really cool pro surfer dudes, just like they're surfer dudes. And they take kids with various disabilities, emotional, physical, mental, and get them up on surfboards. And even thinking about it makes me tear up. Going to their events and seeing kids who weren't verbal before then, and then seeing these kids with their little, water vests on, and these cool, just like big surfer dudes just take them by the back of the vest and pop them up on the surfboard, and you just see a light in their eyes. That's one of my favorite charities, and the work they do is incredible. I work with the Best Friends No Kill Animal Shelter. I mean, who doesn't love just being like surrounded by dogs and cats and being like, please give them money, and like getting to do these great videos. I do stuff with the Children's Hospital Los Angeles. I get so many opportunities to do this kind of stuff, and it's so rewarding. And people always say, they're thanking me. I'm like, I didn't do anything. This is Subaru, and I am merely getting to help shine a spotlight on just some amazing people. Like that's my only role. Yeah. So it's pretty awesome.
And you mentioned you do have opportunities being the co-host of 2 shows that have so many listeners. Do you feel any like responsibilities in being in that position?
Ooh, that's a good question. Just any old kind of responsibilities?
Yeah, to the people who are listening.
That's a really good question. I think because I do the news on both shows, I have a responsibility to tell the truth. I have a responsibility to make sure I'm getting the information as correct as possible. That's not always the case, because in our 24-hour news cycle, you look something up, and then the next day, whatever the news source is like, oh, sorry, we were wrong. Because like they say, people want to be first, they don't want to be right. And that's like kind of the new thing. So sometimes I report something that's incorrect, and I hate that. So yeah, for me, it's about representing as many sides as possible. My news sources I use are everything from the far left to the far right and everything in between, just because I'm just the messenger. I'm just delivering the message.
There's so much turmoil in the news nowadays, so how do you handle that?
It's not easy, because speaking of just being the messenger, people really like to shoot the messenger. It doesn't matter what side you're on, you're going to say something that's going to be, you're just delivering a piece of news that somebody doesn't like. So I try, especially just if we've had like a lot of just, like during the election, it was exhausting reporting it every day, and it was exhausting getting, feedback and criticism. I'm like, I'm just telling you what the polls say. I have no dog in this fight. I'm just delivering the news. So after a while, you're like, let's do some lifestyle stories, and let's do some weird news and some fun stuff. So I think that's another responsibility, to give people a chance to breathe when you're doing, news features. It doesn't always have to be the weight of the world and reminding us that the sky is falling. Life is really awesome, and it's my responsibility to remind people of that too.
And being on a 24-hour news cycle, basically, you're always telling the news, always on radio. How do you prioritize what you want to say on the news?
That's a really good question. I try to start with what I think people need to hear and go down to what I think people want to hear. Just because if there's some big thing that's happening, in the Senate or whatever, it won't kill you to learn something. Like I'll try and start with that, and just so we're all on the same page, and you can go to the water cooler and you can talk to somebody at work and have just 2 sentences of an idea of what you're talking about. But I usually do sort of I try anyway, depending on what's in the news, politics, celebrity, lifestyle, meaning human interest. This mom did this really cool thing, or this puppy got pulled out of a whatever, and just really keep it balanced with fun stuff, with your junk food and your asparagus.
Well, Gina, this is my final question I like to ask to all my guests, is what do you think is the best line of advice you've ever received?
I think that this is something that we talk about on the Adam Carolla show a lot, because he is a big proponent of it, and I get it and I respect it, and it even as an adult I've had to sort of relearn it and tune it up. If you're not willing to put in overtime and work for free and do the things you love to get people to notice how passionate you are, you're probably doing the wrong thing. And you shouldn't expect anybody to notice and pat you on the back. You do what you love, you do it to the best of your ability, you come in early, you stay late, you volunteer, people will notice and you will be rewarded, and you'll get to be that much farther along on your path.
Gina, thank you so much for joining me
Thank
here
you for
today.
having me, it was so fun.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for watching The Danesh Show. We will see you next time.